What's up, everybody? Alright, so today I've got two very different gaming updates to talk about. One that was honestly pretty disappointing if you're a Dead Space fan, and the other one is actually some good news for 007 First Light. So let's get into it. So first off, let's talk about Dead Space. Now, for all you that are huge fans of the franchise like me, some pretty disappointing news was recently shared by former Dead Space producer Chuck Beaver. He basically said that he doubts Dead Space 4 will ever happen, because the numbers just aren't there financially to support another AAA horror game. According to Beaver, modern AAA horror games are just becoming way too expensive to make, unless they sell massive numbers. He explained this on a podcast and said that back in the older EA days, Dead Space needed around 5 million copies sold to keep going. But now because development costs are so much higher, a new Dead Space will probably need to sell somewhere around 7 to even 15 million copies, depending on the scope and production values. And honestly, hearing that really sucks. Especially because Dead Space has such a little fan base. People absolutely love this franchise. The atmosphere, the horror, the sound design, the necromorphs, Isaac Clarke, all of it is iconic. But unfortunately, having a passionate fan base doesn't always mean the sale numbers are big enough for publishers. Beaver explained that companies today are looking for the next Fortnite or the next huge live service success. They want games that constantly make money over time instead of single-player horror games that release once and that's it. And sadly, that's the kind of reality of modern gaming right now. I will say this, even though this news is disappointing, I actually do appreciate Beaver being honest about the situation because it really explains why. EA and Motive may not be going forward with a Dead Space anytime soon. And honestly, I think a lot of us already started worrying when reports came out that the Dead Space 2 remake had reportedly been shelved. That one hurt me way more personally because Dead Space 2 is actually my favorite game in the franchise. I would even say it's the best one overall. I loved the remake to the first Dead Space. I thought it was fantastic. The graphics looked incredible, the atmosphere was amazing, and one of the biggest improvements was Isaac Clarke finally talking again, with Gunnar Wright returning to voice him, because honestly, that is Isaac Clarke to me. I also love how they updated the zero gravity sections to work more like Dead Space 2 and 3, where you can freely float around instead of just jumping from wall to wall like the original game. It just felt smoother and more modern. Overall, I really thought the remake was awesome. But unfortunately, despite how much people liked it, the remake reportedly only sold around 2 million copies. And when you compare that to the sales expectations Beer was talking about, you can see why EA may not see the franchise as financially worth continuing right now. Now, one thing I found really interesting was how Beaver brought up franchises like Resident Evil and Silent Hill. And honestly, Capcom especially has just been dominating the horror genre lately. Resident Evil 2 Remake sold over 16 million copies worldwide. Resident Evil 3 Remake sold over 10 million. Resident Evil 4 Remake sold over 12 million copies. And Resident Evil Requiem already sold around 7 million copies shortly after release. Capcom just knows what they're doing with Resident Evil. I absolutely loved Resident Evil 4 Remake personally. That's probably my favorite remake they've done. Yeah, it didn't include every single thing from the original game, but overall I still thought it was incredible. Resident Evil 3 Remake on the other hand, yeah, I definitely understand the criticism. That game was way too short. It honestly felt more like DLC than a full remake, because it cut out so much content from the original. And Resident Evil Requiem, I've already played through that game multiple times, and I'm still playing it again, because it's just so good. I really like the new character Grace Ashcroft too, and I honestly hope Capcom keeps developing her in future games, because I think she has a lot of potential. Silent Hill has also made a comeback lately too. Silent Hill 2 Remake sold really well, and honestly, I thought it was a great game. It actually managed to scare me a few times too. It was also my first Silent Hill game, because I never played the old PS2 games back in the day. Silent Hill F is one I still haven't played yet, because I'm honestly still deciding if I want to get it or not. But seeing Resident Evil and Silent Hill succeeding definitely makes Dead Space fans wonder why EA won't push hard to continue the franchise. Now personally, if Dead Space ever comes back, I honestly would rather see a remake to Dead Space 2 than Dead Space 4. I know some people may disagree with me on that, but after playing Dead Space 3, I just lost a lot of interest in where the story was going. To me, Dead Space 3 completely lost the horror atmosphere, that made the first two games special. It felt way more like an action game instead of survival horror. I remember playing it and thinking, where's the horror? Why am I not scared anymore? And honestly, the whole Isaac, Ellie, and Norton love triangle storyline was just terrible in my opinion. I think it would have made way more sense if Isaac and Ellie simply stayed together instead of adding all unnecessary drama. And sadly, after everything that happened with Dead Space 3, we all know Visual Games eventually got shut down, which was honestly one of the saddest moments in gaming for me, because they were such a talented studio. But even with all this disappointing news, I still don't think Dead Space is completely dead forever. A company could always potentially buy the franchise someday. We've seen franchises come out before after years of being gone. So I still think of itself eventually, whether that's another remake or maybe in a reboot someday. Now let's switch over to some good news and talk about Deus 7 First Light. IO Interactive officially announced that the game has now gone gold. Now usually whenever we hear that a game has gone gold, that means development is mostly complete and the game is getting prepared for launch. And honestly, I'm really excited for this game because IO Interactive already proved with the Hitman games that they know how to create stealth gameplay and interesting missions. So seeing them work on a James Bond game honestly feels like a perfect fit. But I will say this though, just because a game has gone gold does not automatically guarantee that the launch will go perfectly. We've seen games go gold before and still get delayed afterwards. Cyberpunk 2077 is probably the biggest example of that. And even though 7 First Light does release on time, there's always the possibility of bugs and glitches at launch. We've seen that happen with so many games recently. Dead Island 2 had issues at launch. Cyberpunk had major problems. Plenty of other games were released needing patches and fixes afterwards too. So honestly, the smartest thing to do nowadays is wait and see how the launch actually goes before buying any game immediately. And personally, if Deus 7 First Light does end up getting delayed again, I honestly wouldn't be mad about it, because I would much rather wait longer for a polished game than get a rush broken launch. But hopefully everything goes smoothly, because this really does have the potential to become the best James Bond game ever made. Anyway though, those are my thoughts on all of this. What do you all think about the situation with Dead Space? Do you think Dead Space 4 will eventually happen someday? Will you rather get Dead Space 2 remake instead? And do you think Deus 7 First Light actually launches on time? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below.